A shadow spreads across the Korean Peninsula, a threat few fully understand. Imagine a scientist whose genius was so extraordinary that his predictions influenced the course of human history. Now, picture the 17th century thinker issuing a warning about an approaching devastating event marked by an enigmatic date, 20XX. What would he have seen? What is the true meaning behind his mysterious words? News of crises and calamities echo around the world every day. But what is the connection between all this and Korea? Since then, scholars and prophets have tried to unravel Newton's warning, delving into a puzzle that, if solved, could completely change our understanding of the world. What if what he predicted isn't just a strange coincidence? Have you ever stopped to think about the possibilities of what's to come? As we delve deeper into this narrative, prepare for twists and turns that may change your perception and leave you unsettled. What could be hidden between the lines of these prophecies? Perhaps the answer is closer than it seems. Prepare yourself, because the truth may be more disturbing than you imagine. When I think of Isaac Newton, I marvel at the scope of his contributions to the world of science. He was not just an outstanding physicist or mathematician. Newton was a pioneer who transformed Western thought. In a period when science was beginning to free itself from the chains of superstition and religious dogma, Newton emerged as a central figure. His 1687 work Principia Mathematica not only outlined the laws of motion and universal gravitation, but also laid the foundations of modern physics. The way he merged mathematics and physics is something that still resonates today. But what really intrigues me about Newton is his hidden side. For most, he is the founder of modern science, but few know that he was also deeply interested in alchemy and other mystical practices. Newton believed that nature hid secrets that could be revealed and dedicated much of his time to studies that went beyond conventional science, also exploring religious and mystical texts. This duality in his life makes him a fascinating character, a scientist who dared to explore the supernatural in search of universal truths. Wait a minute. If you've made it this far, it must be because something in this video really captured your attention, right? So how about being part of our community? Subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell so you don't miss any powerful messages that can transform your life. And if this video made sense to you, leave a like so that more people can be touched by this message. Continuing, Newton's ideas about time and history are also impressive. He had a cyclical view of time, influenced by his readings of biblical texts and his interpretations of prophecies. For Newton, the history of humanity was not a straight line, but a cycle of events that repeat over time. This perspective, which may seem strange to a man of science, reveals the complexity of his thoughts and beliefs. Newton's influence extended well beyond his own studies. He redefined the way people began to see the world around them. His scientific approach challenged the Aristotelian view of the universe and introduced a new way of thinking, which emphasized observation and experimentation. The impact of his ideas was so profound that, for a time, almost everything we thought we knew about the cosmos had to be reconsidered. And this re-evaluation was not restricted to science. It also influenced the philosophy, theology, and even politics of the time. When we talk about Newton, many think first of his scientific work, but few realize that he also had a prophetic side. Newton made a series of predictions that, although often forgotten, offer an intriguing look at how he saw humanity's future. He was especially interested in biblical texts and spent much of his life trying to decipher the hidden messages in the scriptures. His interpretations created a curious parallel between science and religion, a topic that is still debated to this day. One of Newton's most intriguing predictions involves future events that he believed could happen. He saw history not just as a record of the past, but as a guide to what might be to come. This led him to make some grim predictions, reflecting his concerns about the state of humanity. For Newton, science and prophecy were not opposing concepts, but rather different sides of the same coin, both seeking to understand the order of the universe and the role of human beings within it. Newton's boldness in predicting future events, guided by his religious beliefs, is a point of constant debate. How could one of the greatest scientists in history also be seen as a prophet? However, this intersection between science and spirituality is not new. Many other scientists throughout history have also been philosophers and mystics. For Newton, scientific curiosity and spiritual quest were two inseparable parts of his intellectual journey. It is interesting to note that many of his predictions have an apocalyptic tone. He was concerned about society's moral decline and believed that the end times could be closer than many imagine. This bleak vision of the future contrasts with the image of a purely rational scientist. Newton's duality as scientist and prophet continues to intrigue scholars and onlookers alike, fueling discussions about the validity of his predictions and what they really mean. When we look at Newton's prophecies, one of the most intriguing is the one related to Korea. This is a topic that, at first glance, may seem distant from his scientific legacy, but which reveals a lot about his worldview. The prophecy about Korea is not just a footnote in his work, it is an attempt to understand historical events through a prophetic lens. The way Newton interpreted Korea is an example of how he sought to connect the dots between past, present and future, seeing history as a continuous cycle. In Newton's view, Korea symbolized more than a simple geographic place. It was a representation of conflict and transformation. He believed that battles between the forces of good and evil could be observed in various contexts, including the Korean Peninsula. For him, certain global events could be indicative of a larger change, a kind of warning about what was to come. This perspective invites us to reflect on how predictions can be interpreted in different ways over time, depending on the historical and cultural context. The meaning of Newton's prophecy about Korea can be seen as a metaphor for the tensions that exist between nations and cultures. In a world often marked by conflict and rivalry, his predictions reveal a concern for unity and peace. In a way, he was warning about the need for mutual understanding between peoples. This becomes especially relevant these days, with ongoing tensions between North and South Korea, making his words resonate even more intensely. The study of Newton's prophecy about Korea also raises questions about the intertwining between science and spirituality. The way he interpreted historical events in light of his religious beliefs shows us that the search for answers is not restricted to the physical world. Reality is much more complex, and prophecies can be seen as an attempt to understand this complexity. This multidimensional approach is something many of us still seek, whether through science, religion, or philosophy. When we talk about predictions made by scientists, it's fascinating to see how these ideas resonate in society. It's not just a question of science, it's a conversation that extends to many aspects of everyday life. For example, when a renowned scientist makes a prediction, the media rushes to highlight it, generating a wave of reactions on social media. People are often attracted to these statements, considering them to be indisputable truths. This leads us to reflect on the power that these figures have to shape opinions and behaviors. The impact of these predictions also extends to the social and political field. When a renowned scientist issues a warning about a possible future catastrophe, it often mobilizes groups of activists who want to act before it is too late. A clear example of this are predictions related to climate change, which have generated a large global movement, inciting fervent debates about public policies and the urgent need for concrete actions. What was once a discussion reserved for academia has now become a matter of survival for many around the world. How these predictions are received can vary significantly. For some, they serve as a source of inspiration, while for others, they provoke inevitable skepticism. This duality of reactions is interesting because it reflects the complexity of the human being and the diversity of perceptions. While there are those who fervently believe in the predictions, others see them as just speculation. In this space for debate, fertile ground is created for discussions and reflections that allow society to evolve in its understanding of the events around it. Another fascinating point is the effect of these predictions on popular culture. Films, books, and even music are often based on scientific or mystical predictions, creating not only entertainment but also fueling debates about the future. Science fiction, for example, is deeply rooted in predictions from scientists and thinkers, leading the public to explore possibilities that go beyond what we know today. In this way, fiction becomes an extension of science, a way of questioning and imagining what might be to come. When we talk about prophecies and the fortunes of a nation, we are led to reflect on how predictions can shape not only a country's self-perception, but also its policies and economy. In many cases, prophecies are seen as reflections of collective hopes and fears, influencing decisions that can have lasting impacts. This is particularly evident in times of crisis, when the search for answers leads people to look for explanations that, at first glance, may seem unusual. Prophecies often expose the anxieties and aspirations of a society. When a scientist or thinker makes predictions, it can intensify debates about a country's fortunes, stimulating discussions about national identity and its relevance on the global stage. This introspection can either unite a population around a common purpose or generate internal divisions and tensions. The relationship between a nation's luck and prophecies can also be seen in historical events. Many nations have narratives about predictions that came true or not, which shapes the way they position themselves in the world. These reports are often used to justify political and social actions, whether to strengthen the national spirit or to confront rivals. The interpretation of these predictions, influenced by history and culture, reveals the complexity of human decisions. The intersection between mysticism and science presents itself as a captivating topic, especially when considering the work of figures such as Isaac Newton. Many would be surprised to discover that the man who formulated the fundamental laws of motion and universal gravitation was also an enthusiast of alchemy and mysticism. This duality in his life reflects a period in which science and spirituality were not seen as opposites, but rather as different facets of the same search for knowledge. For Newton, mysticism was not just a pastime. He believed there was a deeper truth to be discovered at the junction of science and spirituality. His investigations into alchemy, for example, were not simple curiosities, but part of a genuine effort to understand the laws that govern the universe. This leads us to question the extent to which his mystical beliefs influenced his scientific discoveries and vice versa. This complex relationship between rational pursuit and spiritual beliefs creates a rich tapestry of ideas and possibilities. Newton's engagement with mysticism also highlights a fundamental aspect of the human condition, the incessant search for meaning. While science tries to explain the how of phenomena, mysticism often focuses on the why. This duality is crucial, as it demonstrates that the search for knowledge is multifaceted and that fully understanding the universe may require an approach that transcends the rational. This dialogue between science and spirituality is an ongoing process, which remains relevant to this day. When approaching Isaac Newton's prophecies, one cannot ignore the different reactions they provoked over the centuries. One of the first thoughts that come to mind is the skepticism that permeates the scientific community. The idea that one of the greatest scientists in history, someone who revealed the laws of motion and gravitation, also possessed a mystical streak seems paradoxical. Many contemporary scientists view their apocalyptic predictions with a certain distance and disbelief. This is understandable, since science, by definition, is based on empirical evidence. How then can we reconcile the fact that Newton, in the midst of rigorous calculations, also explored predictions about the future of humanity? The prevailing stance in the scientific community is that Newton's predictions about cataclysmic events lack empirical foundations. For many, reading biblical texts and trying to identify historical patterns do not hold up under rigorous scientific scrutiny. Modern science demands concrete and verifiable proof, something that Newton's prophecies clearly do not provide. This view leads one to question the validity of his interpretations, and whether he was truly in a state of revelation or simply extrapolating from his observations of human behavior and history. However, it is interesting to note that his prophecies were not just met with skepticism. In many cases, they were seen as curiosities, topics of discussion in academic circles, without much impact on people's daily lives. There is a considerable distance between scientific scholarship and popular belief. While some saw Newton's words as a warning to be considered, others simply dismissed them as yet another extravagant theory. This disparity in reactions says a lot about how society views the intersection between science and spirituality. On the other hand, there are those who cling to these predictions as if they were unquestionable truths. For these people, Newton becomes a prophetic figure, someone who not only understood the laws of the universe but also had the ability to anticipate future events. This view, although less prevalent among scientists, is quite common in esoteric and religious circles. The idea that a scientific genius could have privileged access to what lies ahead is both intriguing and comforting to these groups. In fact, when analyzing the history of Korea, we find countless examples of cycles that repeat themselves over the centuries. From invasions to internal political disputes, this country's history is full of tensions and transformations that reflect ancient patterns. This raises the question: was Newton simply exploring this idea of cyclic repetition? Perhaps he realized that despite the march of time, human nature and social dynamics often remain constant. Another point to consider is how these cycles are seen by different cultures and at different historical moments. For some, the repetition of historical events may be a warning that we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes. For others, it is a chance to learn and evolve. This duality is reflected in reactions to Newton's predictions. While some see his words as a warning of what could happen, others believe that awareness of historical cycles can be a valuable tool for changing the course of history.